it is quite frightening, the situation you find in terms of the management of public resources. And there's two dimensions to this, and I'm sure most people in this room would agree with this in any event, or you wouldn't be here. But the first dimension, of course, is the scope of government, and it's ever increasing in terms of the requirements for government. I know that people have probably heard me joke about my autobiography, which was going to be called I'm Fat, Stupid and Ugly, What's the Government Doing About It? Memoirs of a failed politician. But I wasn't joking. I know my staff used to hear me talking about that. That's exactly what it was like. Any problem in society, the expectation we have generated is that government is the ultimate solution. And worse still, it gets worse still than that, we fund people to be advocates for groups that can't represent themselves but end up representing the advocacy, and their interest is in for the people that do the advocacy. And you think it's a joke, you think it's theoretical in terms of political philosophy and discussions about that, but I've seen it, and so have people that have worked with me firsthand, the absurdity of it all. At a federal level, it gets even worse, because then you've got the international dimension and the ability of using international treaties or international arrangements to foist upon our community and our society politics and policies that are really not subject to the democratic process. I mean, I think that's all a very, very tried and true analysis. I think most people would accept that analysis. The real question for me was, what do you do about it? And I think that's the challenge. I was just having a discussion about what you do about it on the table. And I think that's the real challenge for people who want to change the system. I think in Australia there's one thing that I've come to the conclusion, and I know this is a bit abhorrent to people that want to see decentralised government and are fearful of centralisation, but I've come to the view that the three tiers of government have to be rationalised. They have to be rationalised, I think, in a way that ensures that we don't get into a position where the central government, the federal government, has full authority, but we have to get away from the position where we have these duplicating and inefficient layers of government. And it's getting quite absurd. State governments, and this has been my experience, really have very little influence both on the economy and in terms of social or general policy within the community. We are very much filters for transfer payments, and those transfer payments are more and more coming from the Commonwealth. In that sort of environment, there needs to be a very detailed and very focused debate on the role of states. I think the first, there's an added advantage, of course, of all of this. You get rid of a tier of politicians, but it's not just about that. It's also about getting better value for taxpayers' dollars. And one of the challenges, I think, in the next period for younger people, and there's a lot of younger people in the room, is how you turn that into a reality. My view with that is, of course, is that you'll never really get rid of state governments, not because of the economics and the policy requirements, because of state of origin. So why don't we just leave state governments for state of origin football teams, and not and have them as a very minimalist political entity that has a governor general or a governor that goes out and opens buildings and has very little content within it other than some sort of transfer administrative function from the federal government. I think any debate about just getting rid of state governments as political entities is bound to fail. So it's really about gutting state governments of their functions and transferring those functions to a more localised level, larger regional governments, and those governments being closer to the community. Now, that doesn't deal with the question I know that everybody's concerned about, is what government should do. I think that requires a change of the sort that I've talked about before you can even get to that point. The problem we have at the moment is that because of the structure, interest groups just shop around between the state and federal government, and where they don't get satisfaction at the state government level. We're seeing at the moment with the environmental legislation, what they've done is gone to the federal government and it's seeking to re-influence the state government via federal powers. So if you're actually going to confront the issue of government and good government, you really do need to deal with the structure of the federation. And that is a big challenge. And I don't think it's going to happen in one generation. I think it's going to take a number of generations to do it. One of the disappointments I have with the Rudd government apart from his essay on neoliberalism, of course. And I recommend you read it after a few bottles of wine. You might be able to understand what it says, because I couldn't understand it. One of the challenges, or one of the disappointments, was that I think the Prime Minister was in a position to start that reforming process of starting to remove tiers of bureaucracy. I was hopeful, certainly in the first couple of meetings that I went to at COAG, that we would get some rationalisation to the health system, the education system, and everything that sort of hangs off the side of that, disabilities and everything else that has now become very confused between the different tiers of government. I still think that has to be the first step in trying to limit the scope of government. If you don't do that, it does allow for that jurisdiction shopping that I was talking about, but it also doesn't allow you to have a proper debate about what governments should be responsible for and what they shouldn't be responsible for. In terms of my own personal position, we were having a discussion at the table. I tend to take the view that the sort of extreme, you're right for this, extreme libertarian type position is not going to succeed in the short term, and really what we really do need to focus in is on a sensible set of arrangements around the social safety net. People have got to accept, if you're going to make any progress in this country, that there's a social safety net. The real issue is how that is delivered, and that I think is where the sorts of arguments that I'm sure people in this room are familiar with do become important. And I think the debate ought to be focused much more on those delivery mechanisms, and with some substance behind it, some research and some ability to argue the case professionally, than sort of broad-based esoterical debates about rights and wrongs of government, and debates that I think end up in really tautological confusion. The bottom line is, in this country, and I think across the globe, there will be a social safety net. And in fact, for those that are interested in that, Hayek in the Road to Serfdom does talk about it. He talks about the cost-benefit being the issue, not whether you have a social safety net. If communities are prepared to bear the cost of that, and it's an efficient cost, I think that you've got to accept that is the desire of the community. It is a matter of ensuring that it is delivered efficiently, and it's focused on those that actually require it. I think that's where a lot of the non-left think tanks have lost the plot in terms of these sorts of discussions, because it does degenerate. I'd rather have a good research paper if I'm in government that says this is a way to strengthen a particular program, to introduce some competitiveness, to get a more efficient delivery of that program, than somebody that produces a document that says big government is bad, big government erodes freedoms, big government leads to tyranny or whatever. I mean, that is just an absolute waste of time. And the reason I'm raising this is that one of the problems in government, to come to the question of good and bad government, is the lack of support for people that want to reform it.